Welcome back to the ultimate checklist for better photos. This is episode 12 of 12, and if you've been with me through the entire series, thank you. And we've definitely covered a lot of ground. From exposure, aperture, shutter speed, light, composition, intent, feedback, all the way through to study. And if you've missed any of the episodes, I'll link the playlist in the description for you. Anyway, today is where it all becomes real and a lot more tangible. Because basically, you don't become a better photographer by understanding photography. You become a better photographer by doing photography. You cannot think your way into skill. You have to shoot your way there. And this is what this episode is all about. Practice. Not theory, not saving videos, not waiting for the perfect moment. Just good old-fashioned practice. So let's think about this for a minute. Practice is essential because skill is built in the body, not just in the brain. When you repeat a movement, such as lifting the camera, adjusting settings, reframing and so on, you're literally building neural pathways. Your brain starts shortcutting decisions. What used to take 10 seconds takes 1. And that efficiency really matters because photography happens in moments. Light changes, people move, expressions shift. If you're still thinking about buttons, you might well miss the moment. Practice reduces that cognitive load. It frees up mental space. And when your brain isn't busy thinking about all the technicals, it can focus more on creative choices. That's the skill, the developmental benefit, and how you actually improve your craft. Psychologically, practice also builds trust. Trust in yourself, that is. The more you show up, the less you doubt. The less you doubt, the more decisive you become. And decisive photographers definitely make stronger images. Okay, so this might sound a bit daft, but bad shots are actually good. I should explain. When a picture doesn't work, it gives you specific information. Maybe the background was too busy. Maybe the subject blended into the scene. Maybe the light was flat. Now that's not really failure if we instead think of it as feedback. Developmentally, mistakes create adjustment. Your brain says, right, next time I'll check the edges. Next time I'll wait for better light. And that's how improvement happens. Psychologically, learning to be okay with bad shots builds long-term resilience. And resilience is massively important because if you tie your self-worth to every picture you take, you might stop experimenting. But if you see each frame as part of the learning curve, you become a bit braver, a bit more thick-skinned, more confident. And confident photographers grow their skills much faster. And here's something else to think about. Bad shots also remove the fear of failure. The first time you miss focus or mess an exposure up, it can feel huge, a bit embarrassing even. But by the 10th time, it's just information, and that's really powerful. Because when failure stops feeling dramatic, you start taking creative risks. You might try a lower angle. You experiment with backlight. You shoot into the sun. Or you wait for a moment instead of playing it safe. And that's where real growth lives, just beyond what feels comfortable. Also, if you think about it, every bad shot actually helps you clarify your taste. When you look at a picture and think, no, that didn't work, you're basically defining your standards. You're training your eye. You're learning what you like and what you don't like, what feels strong and what feels weak to you. That discernment is massive. So a bad shot is not a waste. It's a learning point. It's a reference. It's a step. And the more steps you take, the further you'll go. So in a strange way, the photographers who improve the fastest are often the ones who are willing to take more bad shots, to experiment more. And not carelessly, but bravely. And that bravery definitely builds skill. So let's talk about something that hardly anyone ever admits to, but most of us do experience. Imposter syndrome. That little nagging voice that says, you're not really a photographer, you just got lucky. Other people are much better, and you don't belong here. Imposter syndrome is basically a psychological pattern where you don't internalize and recognize your own progress. You overlook and ignore it, and you magnify your mistakes. And we all do it. But here's the thing. It tends to show up most in people who actually care, those that are trying to push themselves. So if you have ever felt imposter syndrome, there's nothing wrong with it as such. It probably means that you're actually growing as a photographer. And here's where practice helps us to deal with imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome thrives on comparison and assumption. Practice builds evidence, and it also builds confidence. Every time you show up, every time you complete a challenge, and every time you correct a mistake you made last time out, you're basically collecting proof. Proof that you're improving, proof that you're learning, and proof that you're not lucky, you're consistent. Anyway, what's the old saying? We make our own luck. And psychologically, this is massive. Confidence is not built by affirmations, it's built by evidence. And practice gives you that evidence. You start realizing, I know how to handle backlight now, what I didn't used to. I spot distracting backgrounds faster now, and I didn't used to. That's no longer imposter syndrome. That's real progress. When you practice regularly, that inner voice gets quieter and quieter because you're no longer hoping you're a photographer, you're acting like one. And the more you act and behave like one, the more you become one. Practice doesn't just build skill. It actually builds identity, and that's incredibly empowering. For example, I remember the first wedding I ever shot. Now, technically, I was ready. I knew my camera, I'd practiced, and I prepared. But driving there that morning, that little voice was so loud. Who do you think you are? There's far better wedding photographers out there than you. You're going to totally mess this up. It was actually a pretty tough journey. And here's the thing. I felt confident in my skills, but I still felt apprehensive. That's basically imposter syndrome. It doesn't mean you're not capable. It means you actually care. So I did what all the practice had trained me to do. I focused on the basics. Light, composition, moment, one shot at a time. And as the day went on, something changed. I stopped listening to that voice. I started responding to the light, and I started to really enjoy it. By the end of the day, I remember thinking, yeah, that was good, I can do this. And not because somebody told me I could, but because I had evidence. I'd shown up. I had handled the pressure. I'd delivered. And it was a great feeling. That was the moment I stopped hoping I was a wedding photographer and started realizing I was one. And that didn't come from talent necessarily. It came from practice. It came from doing the work before the work mattered. That's what silences imposter syndrome. Not spot-on perfection, but pure evidence. So have you ever experienced imposter syndrome? I'm sure I'm not on my own. Let me know in the comments. I read and respond to everyone. Limitation creates focus, and focus creates growth. Now that's not just a nice phrase. It's actually how learning works. When you limit yourself to one variable, such as only shooting backlight, your brain kind of zooms in. You start noticing how backlight creates halos, how it can flatten the face, and how it can separate the subject from a dark background. If you try to master everything at once, your attention is split. And split attention leads to shallow learning. Focused attention leads to deep learning. And deep learning leads to growth. Limitation also reduces overwhelm. When you give yourself a clear target, your confidence increases because you know what you're practicing, and that clarity is so powerful. So if you're up for it, how about a training challenge? And this is not about perfection. It's all about progress. And we can break this down into 4 phases. And these 4 phases are awareness, control, intent, style, and each phase builds on the last one. The first week is about seeing, not shooting masterpieces, not chasing perfection, simply just seeing, such as how different light sources create various types of highlights and shadow, like how window light feels totally different to midday sun, such as how a cloud moving across the sky can completely change the mood of a scene, and how warm evening light feels completely different to cool shade. You train yourself to notice where the light is coming from, how hard or how soft it is, what it's doing to texture and what it's doing to skin. Now at a deeper level, developmentally, you're training your visual cortex to pick up subtleties, highlight transitions, color shifts, and edge separation. You are literally increasing your sensitivity to light, and you really are starting to see. Psychologically, this builds patience. You stop reacting and you start observing. And practically, this results in fewer distractions in your frame, better light choices, and stronger foundations. The first week is about slowing down enough to actually notice, because before you can control light, you have to recognize it. Awareness is the foundation of everything, and you're laying that foundation down. Now we move from seeing to directing. Week 2 is about control, such as how a wide aperture separates a subject from a busy background, like how a fast shutter speed freezes motion, how a slow shutter speed turns water silky and smooth, such as how raising ISO introduces grain, and sometimes that grain actually adds character. Here, you're learning to choose and not to guess. So let's go a bit deeper, because developmentally, repetition creates automation. Your hands start to know where the dial is without looking. Your eye starts to anticipate exposure before you even check the scene. And that reduces thinking time. When your brain is not busy solving technical problems, it can focus on creative decisions, which has got to be good. Psychologically, control builds a certain calmness. You stop hoping it works because you know how to make it work. And practically, this leads to consistency, more keepers, and less frustration. When your camera stops feeling like a mystery, it starts feeling like an extension of your hand, like another limb almost. Confidence comes from competence, and competence comes from repetition. Now it gets a bit deeper. Week 3 is about intention, such as deciding whether you want a scene to feel calm or chaotic, or whether you want a portrait to feel intimate or distant, and such as asking yourself why you're including that background element, why you're standing where you're standing, and why you're framing it that particular way. This is where you stop reacting to a scene and start shaping it, which over time definitely helps your development. You're training decision making. You're building creative discipline. Instead of pressing the shutter because something is there, you press it because you have decided it says something, if that makes sense. Psychologically, this builds purpose. You feel more intentional and more deliberate. And practically speaking, this leads to stronger compositions, clearer stories, and fewer random shots. And now I'm not saying there's anything wrong with snapshots. They absolutely have their place. But snapshots just happen. Photographs are decided. And having clear intent reduces random shooting. Now is where it becomes a bit more personal, a bit more you. Week 4 is about refinement. Doesn't that sound posh? Anyway, refinement such as noticing you're constantly drawn to sidelight, or that you like to crop tightly, or that you prefer muted colours to bold ones, or that you like quiet minimal scenes rather than busy ones. When you repeat deliberate choices, patterns start to emerge. And when patterns emerge, that's where a style begins. What this means developmentally is that you're building self-awareness. You are recognizing your own visual habits and your preferences. Psychologically, this builds an identity. You stop chasing what everyone else is doing and start moving to what you're drawn to. And practically, your portfolio starts to look coherent, consistent, and more you. Style is not a filter. Style is a series of decisions you make again and again. And yes, style is recognized in hindsight, but practice is what makes that possible. So let me add something here that I think is really important. Practice does not always have to be a solo sport. Going on a photo walk with like-minded photographers is incredibly powerful. Developmentally, you see how other people approach the same scene. You notice different angles, different settings, and also different patience levels. Yeah, that one can definitely be interesting. Anyway, you learn faster because you're exposed to multiple workflows at once. Psychologically, it builds motivation, and there is definitely something about a shared experience that accelerates growth. I absolutely love a photo walk because you pick up tips without even realizing it. You ask questions and you share mistakes. And beyond skill, there's community, old friends, new friends, and conversations about light and life. And this is probably why they were so popular with my college classes. Photography is definitely more enjoyable when it's shared, and enjoyment absolutely motivates and sustains practice. So before we wrap this one up, let's just pause for a second and look at what we covered. Practice builds instinct. Bad shots build resilience. Limitation builds focus, and focus builds growth. Awareness trains your eye. Control builds confidence. Intent builds clarity. Style builds identity. And community builds momentum. None of this is random. This is a natural progression. You start by seeing, you move to controlling, you learn to decide, and eventually you start to recognize yourself in your own work. That is the journey. And practice is the thread that stitches all of this together. Practice turns knowledge into instinct. It turns theory into trust in your own ability. It turns information into identity. And when you think about that, it's really quite amazing. So let me leave you with this. When I first picked up a camera, I didn't know what I was doing. None of us do. I didn't have a series like this. I just had curiosity, and I made a lot of mistakes. And if I'm honest, those mistakes taught me more than my successes ever did. Because every time a picture didn't work, I learned something. Check the background. Wait for the light. Get closer. Slow down, which is the best advice I ever had. And over time, those lessons became instinct. That's what practice does. It slowly sort of rewires you. You stop looking at the world like everyone else. You start noticing light hitting a wall at 6 p.m. You notice shadows stretching out across a pavement. You notice a moment before it actually happens. The world doesn't change, you do. And here's the thing. Transformation doesn't necessarily come from talent. It comes from repetition, from showing up, from being willing to take photos that don't work, from being willing to be a beginner, even many years down the road. You cannot shortcut this, but you can enjoy it. You can enjoy the journey, because this is not a race, it's a relationship. A relationship with light, with story, with your own way of seeing. And obviously the more you practice, the more natural all that feels. Then one day, you'll pick up your camera and you just know where to stand. You'll know how to frame, when to wait, when to press that shutter. And you won't even realize how far you've come until you look back at where you started. So keep showing up, even when the light is flat, even when the shot doesn't work, even when nobody else notices, because you'll notice, and that's ultimately what matters. So if this series has helped, let me know in the comments what you're going to practice first. I really would love to know. And if you do want a place to put all this into action, that's exactly what we do inside our Photography Foundations community over on School. We practice, we share, we review, and we grow together. We're all here on the same journey, just different stops along the way. Link in the description, or use the QR code here to check it out. And if you haven't yet downloaded the 3 essential pillars of good photography, that's also linked down below for you. Oh, and make sure you're subscribed, because there's one more thing next week, a bonus episode. Not about settings, not about technique, but about staying inspired for the long haul. As always, thanks for sticking with me, take care, and I'll see you soon.